global climate change is the portion of the population that lives within a given distance of the shore. Those are the people that are most impacted by hurricanes, possible changes in sea level. And so this diagram, this map, shows those countries in the world where 70% or more of the population of that country lives within 100 kilometers, 60 miles of the coast. The lighter green is 30% or less than 30%, you can see. So Australia, Libya, the Scandinavian countries are more than 70% of their people live within 100 kilometers. And obviously also Japan. Practically everyone lives within 100 kilometers of the coast. Another way to look at this is I talked about the need for clean water. Well, there's a need for just water in general, fresh water, non-salty water. And this is a table of where the water in the world is. It's in units of cubic kilometers. A cubic kilometer is about the capacity of the American Falls Reservoir. So obviously, most of the water in the world is in seawater, but we're interested in fresh water. The fresh water is divided up between glaciers, groundwater, and rivers, but mostly we're interested in what's in the surface and atmospheric water, which is only less than 0.5% of the fresh water in the world, which is itself only 2.5% of the total water inventory. And mostly we're interested in freshwater lakes and rivers, which are only about 70% of those earlier fractions. So, when we're talking, one of the big uses of water that of course there's domestic water, there's irrigation, there's for industrial processes, but a very large use of water is in the cooling of power plants for the generation of electricity. And this, to me, has said we need to look in more detail at the possibilities of using seawater, particularly for those power plants that are located along the coast, so as not to impact the supplies of fresh water that are used for those domestic and agricultural uses, are vital. You can cool a power plant using seawater, you certainly can't irrigate using it. And the lower part of that shows the flows as opposed to the inventory. And river flows, you'll notice, are a minor fraction of both the precipitation total and the precipitation on land. Finally, we look about the different types of cooling that can be done. These are different types. Across the bottom there are different types of generating stations, nuclear, coal, gas, and also coal plants that use carbon capture and sequestration. Carbon capture and sequestration is a process where the CO2 is removed from the stack gases and then piped and pumped underground. It's a process that's very much under development, but not implemented in any large sense today. And finally, one of the, I don't know if it is an environmental right, but it is an expectation that many people in the world have, is that they be able to share in the benefits of the economy, that they have lights like we do here, that they have the energy to operate cell phones or perhaps televisions or perhaps even the industry that would come from a supply of electricity. And this is a table showing the people that do not have access to electricity, not even a small amount of electricity. And what you'll notice is that overall in Africa, that is about 587 million. The total population of the world today is about 7 billion. So the total that don't have any access to electricity is about 1.3 billion, or about 20% of the total population. Most of them, as you see, the most concentrated number is in Africa, although the greatest total number is in developing Asia, and you can see the different areas there. So with that introduction to my two colleagues here, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions a little later in the hour.
That guy again, huh? Yeah, I'm going to be very brief and episodic. I don't actually have a science background. And so I'm just going to be suggestive about some of the issues in sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly perhaps looking at South Africa with regard to sort of science, technology, and to a lesser degree from my vantage point, environmental issues, although those are obviously vital. And particularly looking at cell phones, but also make mention of oil, AIDS, and water. I got my first cell phone in 1997 in South Africa. And the most telling part for me, having not had a cell phone and not knowing much of the technology, I soon discovered, admittedly from the guy who was trying to sell it to me, but he ended up being someone I know because the fellowship I was on, he was part of the body that helped grant it, that their technology was considerably ahead of American technology at the time. And that was because they were utilizing technology from both Netherlands and Japan, which were significantly ahead of us when it came to mobile phone service. In fact, the cell phone that I had in 1997 was a middle-of-the-road cell phone, mid-range cell phone, and its technology was better than any cell phone I had until about 2004 or 2005 in the United States. And in fact, that's never really changed. It's never really fallen behind. When I'm in Cape Town or Johannesburg or Durban or Port Elizabeth, any of the cities in South Africa, if I go to deal with cell phones, the phones that I can see there and that I can get are every bit as good as anything you can get in the United States, and every bit is utilized in South Africa. And naturally, cell phones, for all of us, but particularly for sub-Saharan Africa, hold open the possibility of myriad economic opportunities. Cell phones provide the opportunity to run small businesses, including small local businesses, that can run from anything like simply providing phone service to people. Right? You let people use your phone, which has taken the place of people operating landlines, and they would let people come and use them for a fee. And so that's become a really major way, but also other possibilities, including microfinance, an idea for which the originators won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago. Financial transfer of economic resources, and of course communications possibilities, which we sometimes forget about with our cell phones, right? That they're vital for this purpose. A recent report on the African telecommunications market showed something to me that was absolutely stunning. I would not have believed this, and I need to look deeper into it because I'm a bit skeptical, but it says that mobile penetration in Africa has hit 80%, which is really quite flabbergasting, although it certainly reflects my impressions in the parts of Africa that I have spent time in, including most of southern Africa. And it's still growing at about 4.2% annually, which is faster than anywhere else in the world. Indeed, after Asia, Africa is the world's second largest mobile phone market, which means that today about 8 in 10 Africans have a mobile phone or perhaps have access to a mobile phone. And in part, that's driven by a massive reduction in the costs of owning a phone. I have a South African cell phone now that actually is probably the exact technology that I had in 1997, but I got it for something like 250 rands, just basically to text a couple of friends to be able to communicate. 250 rands is about $20, give or take. And it's a perfectly functional cell phone, not a lot of bells and whistles. And so the reduction in cost of owning a mobile phone have meant that millions and millions more Africans have been able to have access to it. And in part because the average revenue per user for telecom companies has dropped 80% in the last decade or so. Economies of scale have taken hold. The basic infrastructure has been built out, which means that you're trying to get people the hardware of the phone at a relatively minimal cost because you want them to utilize the service in the long term. And independent cell phone companies, as opposed to state-run companies, have driven down prices. And I think that if you've ever been to South Africa, I think probably the single most common advertisements, both on billboards and on television elsewhere, are cell phone campaigns. Yebo is a very, very prominent advertisement campaign, and Yebo simply means yes. It's an old African gentleman who's sort of the spokesperson for MTN, one of the biggest cell phone providers, Yebo, and it's about the opportunity that a cell phone represents. Not all things, of course, are quite as affirmative. I talked yesterday a bit about oil and the possibility of the resource curse in sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria and the Niger Delta are the obvious examples of this, where science and technology tends to benefit multinational corporations and local oligarchs with relatively little clear trickle-down, and indeed the oil industry has become the locus of quite a bit of violence, including sectarian violence, although not limited to that. And so oil is an example of an extractive resource, along with so many others, minerals in sub-Saharan Africa, in which science and technology have a real direct effect on people's lives. Another good example is that of AIDS. Particularly in South Africa is the example that I'll use, because it's worth pointing out that in South Africa there's been a confluence of bad policy embodied by Thabo Mbeki's approaches to AIDS and retrovirals and real just AIDS denialism and monumentally bad policy. Mandela overlooked AIDS, and I think it's the biggest blotch on his record. But he wasn't malignant about AIDS, and indeed after his presidency he ended up being quite strong, an advocate for AIDS research and development of access to retroviral drugs and so forth. Well, Mbeki's policies were quite malign, and that was coupled with Western intransigence with regard to providing access to retrovirals that we now know can have an important impact on Africans and across the continent. And of course it's tied into questions of sexuality and denialism in the town. If you want to read a book on AIDS, my favorite South African journalist, everything he writes is fantastic, is a guy by the name of Johnny Steinberg. And he wrote a book that in South Africa was called The Three-Letter Curse. In the United States it's called Sizwe's Test, that is about AIDS. But I just read everything he's ever written because he's fantastic. But it talks about the culture of AIDS denialism in South Africa, and this is an example again of emerging of cultural phenomena and medical science and so forth. And of course water, access to water. One of the presenters in the last couple of days pointed out how it's been said that the wars of the next century may well be fought over water. And think about the difficulty of accessing water if you're in the Central African Republic. If you're not near a navigable body of water, if you're not near the kind of place where you can get water from, whether it's a stream or a river or a lake, water is a daily challenge. And I live in West Texas on the fringes of the Chihuahua Desert, and we have to have our water brought in from the Colorado River a long way away, and it's kind of nasty taking and tasting, and I'm assuming we don't want it to do any of this stuff. And this is in the United States, right, where water is also going to be a challenge. But imagine what it's going to be when it's a matter of daily life and death for millions of Africans. Although, as the map showed earlier, the amount of, for example, people who live coastally can be shown much by that map of the lights. So where South Africa was pretty well lit across the country, much of Africa was just on the coast. And that means that desalinization is going to be a technology that's going to be vital going forward, not only for the United States, not only for sub-Saharan Africa, but in parts of the United States, Australia, and certainly the Middle East. It's worth pointing out, and I think this is kind of obvious, but science is itself neither inherently good nor inherently bad, but its uses can absolutely have social and political implications that we may well judge as being good or bad. And so, much like my theme of my last couple of talks is that politics really do matter, even though we tend to sort of get exasperated by politics. The politics of technology are like the politics of anything else that we've been talking about when it comes to human rights, which is that with technology, it can be used for good, and it can surely be used in very negative and deleterious ways. Thank you.
I'm just going to briefly talk about global climate change and its relation to human security, in particular armed conflict. Obviously, I think for everyone now that we understand that global climate change is real, that it's accelerating, and that it has significant impacts on the environment. The issue, I think, for those of us who study armed conflict with regards to climate change is that there's certain threats to security that probably will lead to armed conflict over the next few decades. And there's several reasons why we think that conflict, either internally through civil wars and other sort of domestic conflicts, or regional conflagrations as a result of global climate change, is mostly around food security and water. In certain climate models suggest that certain areas are going to be inundated with more severe storms, with much more hurricanes. For instance, in Haiti, there's a strong concern about the number and the magnitude of the hurricanes that are predicted to hit that country over the next few decades. Everybody thinks about Haiti in terms of the earthquake and the devastation that was wrought on Haiti. But what's not talked about in Haiti is, in fact, that they go through natural disasters once every couple years. And it's because of hurricanes. It's in the middle of the Caribbean. It's right there in the Hispaniola. It's frequently hit by hurricanes. And it's ill-prepared. And any time a hurricane hits Haiti, a bunch of people die. Why do people die? Because they don't have the money or the technology or the access or the wherewithal or what have you to construct buildings that are hurricane-proof. If we think about Haiti in that context, now thinking about post-earthquake, remember, after the earthquake, there was over 1 million+ people that were dislocated as a result of that quake. And now, even today, there's 400,000 people living in informal camps, that is intense, in Port-au-Prince. This is 4 years, after the earthquake. Now, if we expect that hurricanes are going to hit that country in more frequency and in greater magnitude, what does that mean for those people who live in IDP, internally displaced persons camps? What does that mean for people who are now in resettlement camps in Haiti, where I've been to these resettlement camps? I can assure you they're not hurricane-proof. Basically, they're, I would say, a very poor quality wood and no foundations, and they're not aerodynamic or anything else that you would see, let's say, on the Gulf Coast. Right after 2 years after the earthquake, a severe hurricane hit Port-au-Prince. A bunch of people died, not reported. If you think about it in terms of Haiti, what about other regions in the world where, for instance, where there's drought possibilities? The Middle East in particular. Models suggest that in the Middle East in particular, that we're going to see what water remains is going to be less and less as climate change continues to occur. There's already water fights essentially in the Middle East. The Jordan River and what Lebanon does and Syria does. Of course, Syria's in a civil war now, but even before then, Syria and Lebanon was fighting over water. And now with less water, you can expect that, and water was used for agriculture in the Bekaa Valley. Syria was using it for their own agricultural needs. And there's been not fights, but diplomatic rows, if you will, over water for quite some time. Now there's even less water. The same is true for the West Bank, Gaza Strip, the occupied territories in Israel and their use of water resources. That's already obviously a conflict, only possibly to be exacerbated by access to clean water. The models, though, however, to date, the findings have been somewhat mixed. When a recent study that looked at climate change, not climate change per se, but looked at fluctuations in weather over the last several decades in conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa, demonstrated that there was no association between temperature fluctuations and some other weather-related phenomenon and internal conflicts. However, with that being said, the science is very, very new. We're trying to predict something that really we've never experienced before in our lifetimes, or with the technology at least we have today, to assess these things. However, many security analysts suggest quite strongly that, look, these models, in the past don't necessarily predict that we will see increased internal conflict or increased conflict across borders. However, if you expect that food insecurity and water are issues that result in conflict, which is the case. So the whole ancient thing of bread and circuses to prevent internal conflict is very true. Bread being the first thing. So if you have drought, you don't have agricultural production as a result of that drought, and the people are going to relocate. Now, when they go to relocate, they may relocate internally or go outside their borders. Regardless, the people that are currently living there may not welcome them as refugees or as internally displaced persons. This mass migration of individuals historically oftentimes has resulted in conflict. Now, the thinking is that the migration will be slower. So it won't be, here's a massive earthquake, people have to relocate quickly. It'll be a much slower thing, but that's not necessarily the case. If you have severe drought in certain areas, we can look to sub-Saharan Africa, we can look to other places in which there's been mass famine and look at what has happened to those places and see for ourselves with these case studies that food security and climate are very intricately tied, and as a result, there's been several conflicts over people moving around and relocating to certain areas. And this has to do with a lot of other things. If you have people that are others from the ones who currently live there, oftentimes socio-religious issues come into play. What you can expect, I think, for myself, as somebody who studies armed conflict for a living, is that oftentimes the borders themselves are sort of a de facto armistice line, and then when those lines are crossed, you can expect that there's going to be some tension. And oftentimes that tension, if not managed correctly, can lead to conflict. I'm going to end on this because the science is so very new that the issues around climate change and conflict aren't well understood. We definitely need a much more research on this issue, going back retrospectively and looking at how droughts and other natural disasters, if you will, have impacted human security issues, especially around conflict, armed conflict that is, and also to looking at models of climate change and suggesting where is the mass migration going to occur if it does occur, and what possibilities are there for relocation that doesn't result in conflict. Most defense departments around the world are already looking at this carefully. Unfortunately, or fortunately for those countries, those studies aren't published in academic literature, so it's very hard to access many of these things. But what has been published, especially among political scientists that study this, there seems to be a consensus, though, in spite of the lack of quantitative analysis, seems to suggest that we can expect more global insecurity as we move forward and as climate change begins to accelerate. Thanks.
Thank you to our panelists. We want to thank them and from the International Affairs Council for their perspectives on the science, technology, and environmental rights. We want to open up to questions and to answers from our panelists so we can have a panel discussion. And we will have questions and answers until 10 o'clock. And so we'll kind of signal when we have room for one question. So if we have any questions, please.
All right, so there's a couple assumptions here with regards to, all right, and we can definitely expect that, there will be more land up north that is useful for agricultural production. With that being said, there's a whole lot of other land that won't be as a result of either extreme weather conditions like hurricanes or droughts. I would say that, one, that the presumption is that, say, Canada and Russia will increase agricultural production. That's not a given. They probably would, I would assume. However, even then, we have to think about food distribution. If you think about the drought-stricken regions in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, and around the Horn, etc., you know, our food distribution system stinks. We produce plenty of food. That's not the problem. The problem is that the food doesn't get to people that need it the most. And there's a variety of reasons that you probably already could think about for yourselves about food distribution and why we have starvation in a world that produces enough food to feed everyone. The second thing, too, is that a lot of these cultures are agrarian. And so what you're expecting is that you're going to have these folks move from a place where they're not, you know, what's happened, especially in drought-stricken regions, and many drought-stricken regions anyway, is that folks are forced to move from their rural areas into urban areas in order to, you know, feed and clothe themselves, etc. And what has happened is that, you know, folks that don't have these skill sets are oftentimes are impoverished as a result. They don't have the skills or the wherewithal or the knowledge to exist in a modern urban setting. So even in spite of the potential for increase in agricultural production in places like Russia and Canada and other northern climes, that it doesn't help somebody in Sudan. I mean, it would, I mean, potentially, but in essence, those folks' agrarian lifestyles is over as we know it. And what's going to happen for them? Well, what we already know is, of course, is Sudan's a mess, and that, you know, a lot of it seems that, you know, and Somalia, I mean, we can think about all those areas, and Ethiopia, and think, you know, what, you know, is this the future of other areas around the globe as a result of weather-related phenomena? I mean, it's not, I mean, obviously there's a lot more at issue in those regions, but certainly I think weather hasn't helped the problems there. And the expectation that we'll have an efficient means to move food from Russia to, say, sub-Saharan Africa, I think is an assumption I wouldn't make.
Could I add something to that? Is this on? Now is it on? Okay. First of all, I think the implicit assumption here is that as the temperature becomes warmer at those areas in northern Siberia or northern Canada or Alaska would be more adequate for agriculture. There is an implicit assumption that when it's warmer there is more rainfall as well, whereas right now, particularly if you look at the difficulties in the oil sands in northern Canada, there is a shortage of water. It simply doesn't evaporate as rapidly because it's colder in that area. So if agriculture is going to spread to the north, then that assumption of adequate rainfall is sort of, it's necessary. The other part is, as Dr. Hudson just mentioned, the people, when they are impoverished because of rural droughts, tend to move to cities. And as you saw by one of my maps earlier, there are a large number of large cities that are right on the coast, making them more vulnerable to hurricanes or tsunamis. And if the frequency of hurricanes is going to increase, they're in still larger danger than they would have been if they had remained in the interior, although they were in danger because of the drought.
I have a question to the gentleman. You mentioned that at the beginning of your speech that the first phone you had is in 1997. It was in South Africa, and then you mentioned it has been better phone till 2004 in the U.S. So what's the difference between the phones in the U.S. and
I am not the person to ask about sciencey kind of things, despite my presence on this panel. So I'm not certain. What I understand is that the cell phone technology in the Netherlands was really quite advanced in the 1990s, and so it was that technology. It's simply, I mean, the difference in technology is simply sort of where they were in the process. I mean, by the next time I was in South Africa, about 1999 or so, it was pretty common for people to send texts back and forth, and we weren't that wasn't as common for us. And I didn't start texting regularly in 2003 or 2004, and now most people use their phones for other purposes. But I'm getting a sense of a follow-up because I'm clearly inadequately answering the question. Do you want to push me on it? Because yeah, and the other thing that's where, I mean, part of the reason I made that case about South African cell phone technology is that I don't want. I mean, South Africa is in so many ways a vibrant, it's a vibrant modern country. I mean, Cape Town is this unbelievable world-class city. Johannesburg is, I mean, kids walking around in Johannesburg now are annoying people because they have their earbuds in on their iPhone, listening to music too loudly and not paying attention, just like everywhere else on earth. Kids in South Africa, adults in South Africa are in the middle of conversations looking down at their cell phones just like we all do in the most rude fashion humanly possible, and yet we all do it, right? So that in a lot of ways, I was shocked by this 80% cell phone penetration, and yet it's absolutely reflective of the world I encounter every year when I'm in South Africa, is that it seems like everyone has a phone. And part of it's tied into the urban culture, and part of it's tied into, Apple was smart enough to deal with market segmentation, and you have the same wide range of whether it's Blackberries or whether it's iPhones or whether it's other kinds of smartphones that many of us have. So I mean, there's been that penetration because there's been the demand, and because the phones can be so useful. Again, I don't know what the dynamics are in Chad, but in much of the Africa that I've seen, it seems reflective of that 80% penetration.
Thanks. Dr. Thompson, don't you think that also part of the penetration in terms of cell phone usage in the developing world had also to do with the lack of infrastructure for landlines, of course? So that was the alternative, the relatively cheaper alternative, even though, I mean, if you look at how much would it cost back in the day when cell phones were kind of by minute by minute, and they would charge you at that, it would actually a lot more expensive outside of the United States than the United States. But the infrastructure for public telephones in the United States was quite extensive. So there was no need in terms of the market. So it was kind of an evolutionary process of this. I'm not sure if that might attribute to that.
That is probably the single. I mean, if you want to talk about a market opportunity, trying to get a landline installed in South Africa to this day is an absolute nightmare. You can't assume that any given housing even has a jack for a phone, and that the jack is connected to outer lines. I mean, so in a lot of ways, it's much more efficient, right? Because we all sort of laugh at the anachronism of landlines, and we all sort of kind of use them. Some of us probably have gotten rid of our landlines, but most of us have it as a kind of thing that we think the kids make fun of, right? Well, in South Africa, and in many parts of Africa, of urban Africa, they simply skipped that stage, right? They went from not necessarily everybody having a landline. I mean, lots of people obviously do, but to simply getting a cell phone for millions of, and if it's 80% penetration, we might be talking about, approaching hundreds of millions of Africans. A cell phone is their first phone. Their only phones. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, if you've ever dealt with the frustration of trying to have a landline installed in southern Africa, you can understand why a cell phone is tremendously appealing. Go get it out of the box. They push a couple of buttons. They take a bunch of your money, and you got a phone that'll work until you top it up the next time to pay.
Yeah, and this is the same case for Haiti as well. I mean, actually, it's a cool thing to have multiple phones on your hip. And even after it was remarkable that, because it's for the same exact reasons, except even more because Haiti's so impoverished that, there wasn't really, except for really urban areas within Port-au-Prince, and not even all of Port-au-Prince, just certain more wealthier areas of Port-au-Prince, there was no landline phones. As soon as the advent of cell phones came, it was an immediate adoption of that technology. It was very inexpensive, relatively speaking. Nowadays, you go to Haiti, that 4G, LTE, it's like, I remember right after the earthquake, I went down there, I had better reception on my phone after the earthquake there than I had back home in Detroit. How is that? And it was a really serious thing. It actually led one of my colleagues, Richard Garfield, wrote a paper on this where he tried to estimate how many people were killed just based on pre and post cell phone usage. And said, well, here how much, this is the percentage of cell phone usage that went down, so ergo, this must be how many people died because this percentage of cell phone use went down. Now, I found that it was a stretch, and I kind of criticized it, but It was certainly, I got where it came from in his head that, you know, because it's such strong penetration of usage among folks, and that it actually allowed, I mean, there was a certain amount of freedom that was involved when Haitians got cell phones, because there wasn't access to those communication tools. And, you know, many, like I was just talking about, many people had relocated to Port-au-Prince because of the lack of agricultural opportunities in their villages, and the abject poverty that exists out in the rural areas. You know, so now they can call their relatives in those areas, and it was a bonding, I think, moment for many Haitians.
So when Dr. Hudson was talking about the global warming and different things like that, the question that I had is, I mean, with humanitarian aid and stuff, there's definitely implications of will the people get it and stuff. But the question I want to ask is, do you think that it is the responsibility of the world nations to give the aid to those that are in need, you know, like the ones that have drought and different things like that?
I mean, of course, we already do that through World Food Program, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, et cetera, UNDP. I mean, those agencies do good work. I'm fearful for the magnitude of what could happen with superstorms and, you know, long extended droughts in regions that are highly populated. I mean, if you think about mass migrations, I'm not talking, you know, 1 million people. I'm talking tens of millions of people moving as a result of an inability to secure basic needs, and in this case, clean water and adequate nutrition. If that comes to, I mean, I hope it doesn't, but if it does happen, we need to be prepared. And I'm unfortunately here to say that I don't personally feel that we're near as prepared as we need to be, not only in multilateral agencies as big as the UN or any other international NGOs. I don't think any nation, including the United States, is prepared for something along that magnitude.
Thank you for a very stimulating panel. You've just given me an idea for a paper entitled Earth, Wind and Fire, Environmental Insecurity and Conflict. But my question, and it's related to this because I've been thinking about this for a while, is that when we think about human rights, one of the most important economic rights is the right to earn a livelihood and the right to lead a good life. But there's a problem because there's an imitation of the West by big countries, and they need energy for that. So really this question is for Dr. Herring about the safety of nuclear energy in many of these developing countries as they try to avoid oil and coal. And in fact, the safety record that I know of is that the 2 major nuclear accidents that have happened in the Soviet Union, in Chernobyl, and the United States at 3 Mile Island. So I wonder if as the countries try to have nuclear energy the way France did for a while, and Japan until Fukushima, do you have confidence in their ability to pursue nuclear energy in a safe fashion?
That's a multifaceted question, and in simple answer, the answer is no. But let me go into a little bit more detail about that. There is one is whether or not various countries in the world have the ability to, let's say, import reactors, have them built by foreign entities. That's the case now in the United Arab Emirates, where the Koreans are building basically Western designed reactors along the coast there. They have been trying to educate their regulatory offices, the government offices that would play the role at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So that's one aspect of it. Some of it is just in the location of where those are going, in terms of the possibility of armed conflict in the area, also the possibility of seismic activity, of tsunamis and earthquakes in those areas. A final one is in the security of the plant itself and the possibility for weapons proliferation should that fuel fall into hands that want to use it for the production of weapons rather than for the generation of electricity. So there's a number of different areas where that uncertainty is, and that's something that is of a lot of concern to the overall, let's say, nuclear enterprise in the United States and around the world, particularly on the part of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is basically the non-proliferation part, but also in looking at the real need, and this is what was seen at Fukushima, and I would include that one among the two others that you mentioned, where there was a relatively well-advanced technical society in Japan that where there was not enough independence between the utility and the regulatory agencies. That is the equivalent of the U.S. NRC. And that would then, we would hope, have led to them looking at those dangers of that particular location in Japan at the time of construction, or at least during the last 10 or 15 years when they did some modifications but did not raise the location of their auxiliary diesel generators for cooling. I won't go into the whole story behind Fukushima, but nevertheless, that is an area of substantial concern. I think that there are a number of different ideas and ways that we could address those concerns, but it is certainly an area of concern.
We're very fortunate to invite all our panelists, all of our delegates back at 10:15. We're going to take a small break right now, but we will have a roundtable discussion where we're going to pose questions to all of our delegates on their careers in international affairs, human rights, and pretty much anything you've been waiting to ask our delegates. So we'll invite them back at 10:15. We'd like to invite everyone to join us. So thank you. Please enjoy. There's fresh bagels from the 5th Street Bagelry. We do want to thank them. We've got cream cheese, honey butter, lots of coffee.
So when are you out of here? Right after this or right after the next one?
Yeah, to the next one. Let's talk about
Given that two of those talks are a lot
I read, the last, I think, of 10 papers that have been written since 2010 on this topic, and it's like, okay, I'm an expert.
Yeah. Yeah, a grad school cramming. Yeah, I actually, the thing about cell phone penetration was simply largely a cutting and pasting from something I found last night. So I just just realized I put quotation marks around it and say find citation, not because I'm ever going to do anything with it, but I don't want to be Joe Biden, like in the tribute. So in the paper, it's like I acknowledge that that's somewhere else, but when you're giving a talk, you don't cite everything that you're right.
Yeah. This was a fantastic panel. I thought this was great.
Yeah, it worked. It worked well. The one thing I would like to have raised is just a reminder that for all of the environmental instability, for all of the fears of drought, that it's always worth pointing out that famine is always a politically constructed crisis. That drought can exacerbate. The other thing is that when you think about like the U.S. or Europe, the reality is that who's going to feed a drought in Ethiopia or Somalia is much more likely to be South Africa and Zimbabwe, right? And South African culture sort of reaches. I've been in Ethiopia and turned on the TV, and you have effectively South African advertising. You get SABC on almost every television in sub-Saharan Africa. You get South African products. South Africa is so culturally dominant on the continent. I think people are astounded by that in English-speaking, particularly in English-speaking Africa.
Oh, thank you.
Spend time in over.
No, this is the first time I've been to Pocatello.
Welcome.
I enjoyed myself very much.
Like when I saw you here yesterday, you talked about
Yeah, I mean, there's South Africa is a country of tremendous beauty and remarkable cities and everything, and then there are
and I'm like, I may have read something.
It's quite possible you might have read something. If it's about counting dead people
Yeah.
or surveys in conflict zones, it might have been.
Went, took a shower, was ready to go. Go down.
Just because we got
Is there a public transportation?
No, that definitely wasn't me.
I didn't know if you'd ever done any stuff.
No, I don't want to know. I don't shouldn't do it.
right.
That was
That
struck
really
when I
depressed the
was.
hell out of me.
Yeah, no, so I mean, South Africa is one of the real problems is that outside of the major urban center, and even then, like, you know, Cape Town, the trains are
Jack of all
great.
trades.
Johannesburg, really, I mean, you need to be careful. And you and I, you know, I mean, let's face it, especially by South African standards, you look white. The trains are tremendously dangerous. So they're trying to make it better, and there are some trains that
I
are
have.
for very
I drove, I
specific
take it back, I
purposes,
drove by
but
it once.
they're
when I
for
was
very
moving from
specific
Detroit
purposes, right? So
to
the Shell train that
Boise.
was
I
You
drove
really
past
need to know what you're doing.
you really need to know where you're doing. Yeah, you gotta, you know, in some cities the combi taxis, right, the little buses that are like are perfectly safe. In some, you would be taking your life in danger.
What's up with UBC? Are they going to make better? So that he realized that we were getting UBC.
Yeah, it's the one, University of Cape Town is the one South African university that I would drop everything for a job at. Wits is probably a better world-ranked university. Stellenbosch would be another one that I would because it's in the Western Cape, not far from Cape Town. But UCT is fantastic. So all the roofs are these sort of red slate roofs at the University of Cape Town. When you see it over it, the tops of buildings are all red. And of course, because they were all perceived as being radical leftists, it was called by both supporters and enemies Moscow on the Hill. Yeah, I'm gonna go grab some a bagel.
So we have what, 15 minutes?
So before you leave.
Oh, sure.
Do you have comments?
Oh, yes, actually, you know what, actually, it was mostly of notes, mostly about, what was it? Well, I wanted to know differences between attitudes on a bunch of different things between Hamas supporters and Fatah.
Yeah, we should process that. Yeah, I can easily do that. But I'd love to. I mean, because, you know, I could pursue really like 30 or 40 hypotheses right now.
But the other thing is that I have in the camps survey data on attitudes towards secularization of politics within the camps. This is from 2009. How religiosity tied to Western attitudes in the camps. So we had a series of questions about attitudes towards the West.
Yes, so anti-Western.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then what else do I have? Oh, attitudes. The data on attitudes towards Israel, and I think that there's not just Israel as a state, but possibilities for peace. I think we asked a question about right of returns and other things.
So is your data public?
And a bunch of questions on resistance operations, both against Israel and against the West.
I see. Is your data publicly available or not yet?
No.
Embargoed for how, a couple more years?
Well, I don't know. I would have to talk to the SCO and see.
Oh, I see.
But I can certainly get permission for you to look at it.
I would love to actually.
I'll make those
Because I mean,
phone
at
calls.
least in comparative, I mean, even you and I could work on something together. I think if we could look at different things in terms of how people learning, in terms of how Palestinians is thinking, really in Palestine, outside Palestine, that would be like interesting. This would, of course, help us in the sense because you will not be able to do it on your own. I cannot do it on my own. Then we come together like, okay, let's bring this together.
Greater than the sum of the parts.
So that would be great. At least I think we should communicate for sure. Quite a lot. Right? I mean, my knowledge of survey research is, you know, by grad school, it's rather limited, but it's what you do for a living. I work closely with Matt Corrado, who's a methodologist. And basically he, you know, does this pretty well, but in the sense to think about a broader perspective. I think you want to really come up with something interesting. Sarah was happy with our works in the sense that she suggested that I should probably come for like 3 talks in Boston, Harvard, Northeastern, Boston University. And she often does, she organizes. But she would bring a speaker to speak 3 different days.
Yeah, she mentioned that briefly to me yesterday. I'd be happy to go to Boston, and I like talking about the issues.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Let's work on that. I think good. I mean, you know, at least to present that work and see how it's perceived, how people look at it. I think there. I mean, at least in my data set, I mean, I was shocked by certain things, right? Like the level of secular feeling. Like, no, we want 51%. I don't want this. I feel like we need to do something.
And that's actually what brought me to write down all those rest of those notes, because I was like, it seemed, I'll have to go back to this data, but as I recall, they're not as secular in the camps. I take that back. They were more secular in the camps than I anticipated, because there was that hard religious fundamentalist group that was, especially in Einel Hellway, that was just right there.
Yeah.
I was expecting to come out in the survey data that was kind of a wash, but it ended up that, like, yes, Islam should be a part of thing, but much more stronger that it should be secular with a sort of a Islamic.
So I mean, Islamic rule, or is it kind of a source of informing how we live our lives?
That's exactly.
People say, yeah, sure, cool. But then, do you want to live under Sharia type of, Saudi Arabia-like institution? I mean, the only countries in the world that are Islamic countries are Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Pakistan. Right? Everything else is predominantly Muslim societies. They're all actually secular institutions. Right.
I'm just going to make a quick announcement. Has anyone lost a cell phone?
That's fine.
Perfect.
Oh, that didn't take long.
That was my car.
That's my 1997 cell phone.
I got it for me on eBay.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of stuff that needs to be.
I'll send you the report I wrote. We have a lot of people that are involved in it. I'll send it to you. I think you'll find it very interesting. Because there were some eye openers in there.
And also, I'm looking at your methodology. I've already downloaded a couple of things, and in terms of how you work, I think it's great so far.
Yeah,
I have the time to delve into.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I'll send you the slides on the. I gave a couple of presentations now on this new approach. We're still using GPS, but we're gridding out, and now we're looking at correlations regionally, like autocorrelation and spatial autocorrelation, and how to do that with clustering effects and all this stuff. That's all the crazy math stuff, and how to deal with that with regards to how do we most accurately estimate human rights abuses, deaths, mortality, morbidity, or any other good things like immunization rates or what have you.
So when you were at Michigan, did you know John Garcia at all?
I didn't know, but I know the name.
Yeah, he's a Latino guy who works on Latino. He's like the earlier people who didn't want to do this stuff on Latinos. And he actually teaches that workshop at Michigan for social science research and stats for social science.
Oh yeah, the summer workshops.
Yes.
Oh yeah, those are great. I haven't unfortunately even attended any of them. And I was, when I was there too, is like I could easily just like motor down over there and taken some like esoteric high level statistic course and just never did it.
Yeah, it's funny. All right, I'm gonna run through the rest of it.
Sure.
Teams wise, actually. Yeah, let's do that because it's.
I didn't get a chance to actually
I was wondering. I know. Well, thank you for helping me remember.
Morning.
cell phone service and stuff like that. Has there been an increase in using social media like Twitter and Facebook and things like that?
Studies on that?
Yeah.
I'm quite certain. I mean, there's tons of studies now on social media, but I'm not sure about South Africa.
I was going to say, in the world in general, has there been like a fluctuation in increase in media or anything?
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of studies now on the Arab Spring and social media. You can look that up. I mean, it's and not just peer review, but everything. Like people are like writing books about that stuff now.
So that's actually what I took a class when was in Media and Society and how it affects media and society. What we were doing was YouTube for a project. It was a thing that I was learning about where it's like convergent media or whatever, where we're going away from being isolated to being more social with each other,
Right.
using those medias. So I was just like, oh, social media, I should ask them about that. Because I'm like, I have to leave, but I'm going to quick. So that's good to know the studies that I can do.
Yeah, and actually, I would strongly recommend, because it's so fresh, that looking at the role of social media in the Arab Spring.
Well, and that's the thing that I noticed is that, people used to just be, like, you had companies that were the, what we call gatekeepers, or things like have the flow of information that controlled it.
Right.
Now everybody's starting to do that. So that's why I was like, oh, this is a really interesting.
Right. So, yeah. So the atomization of media and consumption of media too. So it's not just that there's more out there; is that people are reading more disparate.
Some days, I'm telling you, I don't leave till tomorrow afternoon. By about 3 o'clock today, I can see a serious nap beginning the process of catching up in my sleep.
Yep.
If the government's
3 o'clock tomorrow?
like stamped down, like
Tomorrow afternoon at about 2:30.
Right. Exactly.
where they
So
have
today at about 3 o'clock, I anticipate lunch will be done here.
Right, I mean, but there's also
workarounds.
workarounds. So that, it happened in Egypt too. And all of a sudden everybody starts going on tour or using VPNs or trying to get around government censorship on internet sites.
Well, unfortunately, I'm flying out of Salt Lake. So I gotta leave. I'll leave at about 10ish or so, and give myself plenty of time.
I think it's true. I mean,
Regional airport in West
and that's
Texas
not my
is
content area, but I would say that there's a
It's
strong
both
consensus
expensive and
that
it
social
would
media
have
had
taken an
an
entire day.
extraordinary role
All right.
in the Egyptian uprisings.
Good morning.
that's the thing that I noticed is when
So we are down to our last event. I want to use this opportunity to thank our audience for being here with us, for coming over to support us. I want to thank International Affairs Council and my students. I'm very proud of you. You are the best in the world. I want to thank also our delegates. Without you, of course, we won't have any event. We are proud of you. We are very grateful for you honoring our invitation. Some of you will even invited you less than a week, and you were very kind to respond to our invitation. Please, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We also want to thank our sponsors. There are a lot of them we didn't mention their names last night. It's not because we didn't appreciate what you gave to us. I think it's because of lack of communication on the part of those that received the check and the person who was putting together the program. Please don't hold it against us. We appreciate every dime you gave to us. Thanks a lot. So for this section, it's a very straightforward and simple one. We want to give our audience, particularly our students and those of them majoring in international studies, to have the opportunity to pick the brains of these eminent scholars and professionals here. My students are always ask about career prospects. They are always worried what we do after getting a BA degree in international studies or in political science or in history. My response to them all the time is that there are jobs out there for you. There are opportunities out there for you. So it depends on how you're mentored and how you prepared yourself for the world outside ISU. So on the panel we have professionals who are well educated in matters of this nature, and we want their advice. We want them to speak about their careers themselves. We want to learn from them, talk about human rights, talk about international relations, give general advice in any of the things that interest you. So we have Derek Carson, who is an associate professor at the University of Texas at Symposium Basin. We have Karam Dana, who is a Palestinian-American professor, University of Washington. We also have Dr. Thomas Utom, who is a senior research associate, Institute of Global and Cultural Studies at Binghamton University. He's also the founder of Friends of United Nations Alliance of Civilization. And then we have Dr. Royce Hudson, who's assistant professor at Boise State University, School of Social Work. We have Dr. J. Stephen Herring, a laboratory fellow and deputy director of nuclear science and engineering at Idaho National Laboratory. Then we have our own Dr. Jeffrey Kelly, who teaches political science at Idaho State University. Please welcome. Okay, so if you have any questions, just raise your hand. I will spot you. Yes, please.
This is for Dr. Herring. But so your profession, it's a little bit different for most of us. We don't necessarily have a science background, but there definitely is the opportunity in it for us. What can you see maybe engineering students in the international studies, how could that benefit them, and then how could maybe somebody that they just look at international studies and then they can look at science to broaden their perspectives and outlooks and possibilities?
There are several different areas within, and I'll talk to nuclear engineering because I'm most familiar with that. But there's a surprising amount of international work that is done. First, on the part of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is part of the United Nations and is headquartered in Vienna. They have two roles, really. One is in doing non-proliferation work, that is to check on various power plants and nuclear fuel cycle facilities. So that involves a lot of interactions among the governments that are involved. They also have a wide range of different studies where they call in experts, not only in the technical parts of these, but in also the legal parts, and in the aspects of international relations among the countries. Moving beyond the UN, there's the international, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is essentially the industrialized countries of the world. And they also have a number of different areas where they look at international law, they look at the fuel cycle, they look at liabilities across borders. The Department of Energy in the United States, in particular, their General Counsel's office is quite involved both in the treaties that govern liability. For instance, if a U.S. company, let's say Bechtel, was doing work in another country, let's say in Japan, and some accident occurred, how is the liability assessed, in which courts is it assessed, and so on. There's also areas, for instance, in the international finance, some of the intellectual property that we get into, and how various patents are covered by treaties and by various research agreements. Also, I should mention that the State Department has I think, an increasing interest in the technical capabilities of the countries in which they have missions. They're interested in having people with technical capability there. But that requires not just a knowledge of the technology that they're working on, but also the interaction of the U.S. State Department with the foreign ministry of that country and with the government there. So there are a number of different ways that we work together.
My question is for Dr. Hudson. One of my areas of interest is militant groups, particularly in areas such as Lebanon. And as you said earlier, there's not a lot of current research available. But with the outpour of refugees from Syria into bordering countries such as Lebanon and Jordan, what do you personally see as some of the long-term effects that it could have on these countries, especially where militant groups such as Hezbollah are moving out of Lebanon and into Syria and leaving strongholds that are being attacked now?
Well, if I knew, that'd be it's a $1 million question. I mean, it's unknown what the future holds for Syria or Lebanon, and I don't think anyone that prognosticates that that this is the way it's going to happen is deluding themselves. There's too many variables involved to be able to predict exactly what's going to happen. I mean, I have my own ideas of what I expect may happen. One of the things I do expect is it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately. And there's a strong possibility that Lebanon will fall into civil war. If that happens, of course, it's a tremendous humanitarian disaster. I mean, it's already a massive disaster in Syria. In some regards, some folks, I think, including myself, are kind of surprised at the resilience of the Lebanese society not to already be in civil war. If al-Qaeda elements begin to attack Hezbollah strongholds much more strongly than they have currently, which is already, they're car bombing South Beirut and other Hezbollah strongholds on at least a once-a-month basis almost now. They've rocketed them. They've killed the Iranian cultural minister in Lebanon, and these sorts of things. Hezbollah will only take that for so long, and at which point they'll start attacking Sunni targets in Saida and other places. That's my prediction. So take it for what it's worth. I just told you don't predict anything. And if that scenario occurs, then I can see where easily would be a Sunni-Shia schism, where the Christians, because that's already happened. And I was in Beirut in 2008 when there was they went almost to civil war in I call it the Battle for West Beirut, where they surrounded Hariri's palace in Hamra neighborhood and held it for a week or two, and killed a bunch of Sunni militia in my neighborhood. And that was a much less the stakes were much less there than they are now with regards to Hezbollah supporting the Assad regime in Syria and sending guerrillas over there. And as a result, AQ elements infiltrating Lebanon and attacking Hezbollah. That I think can get a lot worse. To this point, Sunni have been generally passive, even during if you look at the Civil War, the Sunnis weren't very strong. Murabitun wasn't a very effective force in that Civil War relative to the Christian militias and the Shia militias, Hezbollah and Amal. And of course there's the Palestinians as well. They were really kind of a non-player. I don't think that's going to be the case this time. And unfortunately, if they militarize to the extent they already have in Tripoli, where there's daily clashes between Alawi and Sunni in that town, the second largest city in Lebanon. If that spreads to Beirut, it's going to be a complete disaster, and it's a quite strong possibility that could occur.
So this is a question that my mom actually requested that I ask, but being as my future interests involve human rights research, and there's a good chance that I could experience atrocities later on in my life, she wanted to ask, how does one, I guess in your advice, prepare for some of the realities I might experience later on down the road, being as a student who didn't really experience a whole lot in their life as far as negatives, you know what I mean, but...
In this, as in so many questions, it's worth looking at Public Enemy. Don't believe the hype. There are dangerous circumstances around the world, but you're not going to be, you're not going to be airlifted into those places right away. Your exposure to the nastier sides of the world will come in combination with your experience and ability to handle those things. Now, that obviously isn't universal, and things are thrust upon us, but you'll start off in more comfortable, safe settings, universities and so forth. You'll get to know places and people and the languages. You'll get to know locals. You'll get to know where to travel and not to travel. The world's fundamentally a safe place, except when it isn't, and that's the case kind of anywhere. And if you don't do the kinds of things that you wouldn't do in New York City, odds are you're going to end up being okay, because by the time you're in a dangerous or an allegedly dangerous situation, you're going to know enough how to handle it. You're going to know the language, you're going to know the people, you're going to know the political context, you're going to know the dumb things not to do, you're going to know the dumb things that you can get away with doing, and sometimes you're just going to get lucky, and sometimes you're going to get unlucky, but tell Mom you're going to be fine.
I think one of the very practical ways in which you can prepare for that, in a sense, is that take the opportunity to talk with people who have been in those situations before. So whether it is refugees from the Congo who are probably here in Boise, Idaho, if not in Pocatello, Idaho, or from Iraq or from Syria, and then whichever organization you're working with, whether you're working at a university, and the senior professors there who have been to these places, or whether you're working for a humanitarian organization, find somebody who is older, or senior, who has gone through these situations and can kind of prepare you for and warn you what to expect and what not to expect. The sad, and then finally, I think the sad thing is that you're right. There are all these atrocities happening, but because of the way in which the world has also become a global village through the internet, in a sense, you can become desensitized to this by watching, because you're watching the news, and you see horrible things in the news all the time. So, when you actually go into those situations, you can be prepared for it.
May I add a couple of things here? Although I do work my work really deals with places that have been plagued with a lot of conflict, a lot of poverty, bad economic problems, a lot of depression. People are sad. So there's that picture to be painted. But also oftentimes as a person who, I grew up in two cultures in a sense. So I grew up in the Middle East, but I also lived in the United States for a comparable period in my life. So kind of half and half in a sense. So I've had that opportunity to see two places in a sense, and kind of also experience the horrible things that do happen in the United States. Okay, we don't know much about what happens in Detroit. We don't know much what happens in Chicago, the south side of Chicago. We don't know what happens in different places in the United States. There is serious poverty in this country. Okay, the vast majority of people are actually hardworking people, right? So as far, the interesting thing is that the impression oftentimes that you get outside of the United States about what takes place in the United States is either people are very, very rich, okay, and very happy, kind of Hollywood type of images. One, and then two, the rate of crime is that just off the, it's crazy. It's terrible. You can't walk safely. That's the impression that people get, for example, in the Middle East. They say, "You were in Chicago. Weren't you scared? Like, didn't people shoot at you?" No, actually, it didn't happen. I've lived here for close to 2 decades, and no one has shot at me. Okay, but that does happen. Actually, yeah, someone has shot at me.
First time I saw someone shoot at somebody was in Chicago.
Yes. So, but the point is what I'm trying to say is that if your mother or people who care about you are worried about you, not only that worry is not necessarily should only exist outside the United States, but also into the United States. There's a lot going on. A lot of those are honestly sometimes fallacies in some respect. And as Derek, Dr. Katzum suggested, there is quite a bit of once you interact with these different places that require being careful and all, it would be incremental in terms of your exposure. So you will not be depressed very quickly. It will take a while, unfortunately. I'm sorry to say. So it'll be incremental in a sense. You will be, again, safe places. You'll learn at school, at a university setting, people who can actually communicate with you and understand, not only in terms of language, but understand where you're coming from. So oftentimes I think that worry is over-exaggerated, especially when it gets to the Middle East. So if you go and tell your parents, like, hey, I want to go to Morocco, or I want to go to Egypt, or I want to go to, well, not Syria. Don't go to Syria right now. But Yemen, okay, I want to go to Jordan. And people get scared, right? They're like, well, why would you go there? Okay, well, why not? I mean, I'd rather, don't go go to Detroit, but rather, it's the same thing really for me, It's go and see everything. And going to these places, you shouldn't be scared. There's a lot to offer there for you to even to learn. So just do it.
I mean, I just want to make one point. I mean, eventually you will, if you stay in the field long enough, you will see some things that you wish you hadn't seen. With that being said, in social work we talk about compassion fatigue and tertiary victimization and these things. Self-care is really important. You have to think once that occurs, and it occurs multiple times. I think you have to take a step back a little bit. And do healthy things, and really you have to be conscious about your own mental health, and physical health, because you're not going to be effective otherwise. So what I have done in the past is, especially Haiti. Haiti was the worst. I've never seen anything like that. And then that was before the earthquake, and then the earthquake was even worse. So for me, I put dosage, if you will. That is, I go to these places where there's mass humanitarian disasters. I do my job, and then I leave. I don't have to sacrifice my health and well-being, my mental health and well-being, for what? It's not going to help anybody if I'm paralyzed as a result of compassion fatigue or other sorts of traumas. So like I said, in social work, we spend a lot of time actually talking about self-care, and as you move forward, I think it's important to have a plan in place to deal with some of those things. I mean, and I've been, I think, successful to this point in dealing with some of that stuff. And just be cognizant of where you are mentally at all times, and as long as you take a daily checkup, you should be fine.
I wanted to kind of ask all the delegates if you want to briefly speak, but I was really impressed, Dr. Dana's bio. It says people need a new way to look at conflict, society, and culture besides the way in which these topics are currently being presented. And I think that's been true for the whole symposium, something that's really kind of, I've noticed in every presentation. And I was wondering if you would share just some of the most exciting advances or developments you've seen in your fields of research, which has shown, the way that people are looking at conflict, society, and culture in that human rights realm in your fields of research.
You're thinking of specific examples a little bit difficult.
The best way for me to answer your question is to just pretend it's another question and answer something else, which is that which
is what he's going to do. Yes.
Which is one of the happiest times I've had in Southern Africa was the 2010 World Cup, and it was because it was the one time it felt like the country was the most unified that I'd ever seen it. Now I know that some of that was just public consumption. I know that there were some realities that make others wonder whether the World Cup was worth it, whatever that means. But I got to say that traveling around the country and going to the fan parks and knowing that less than 20 years earlier the country was in a state of de facto civil war was really remarkable and transformational. And having seen some of the things we've been talking about in Southern Africa and knowing they were still there, it was just a reminder of some of the hope and the promise and the opportunity that a country that I've come to just deeply love. I'm going to steal a phrase from an academic who I know is after a long enough time in when I'm in Southern Africa, I miss the United States, but when I'm in the United States, I find myself always missing Southern Africa. And that was just one example of how sort of it all seeming worth it and it all coming together and the sort of reconciliation reaching its false apex. But that was a really nice moment amidst, you know, the daily realities of, I mean, if you've ever been detained by African police, you've seen the sort of darker sides of the human experience. So that was a really nice one for the entire month.
Yeah. Do you want to go? Go.
No, I'm going to talk about perhaps and the most intellectually stimulating experience that has transformed my intellectual life, academic life, or professional life, and that is back in 1989. I was part of a group that was advocating to bring a professor to our campus as an endowed professor, and we were successful in lobbying the state government and the university in bringing this professor. And I had the chance to actually proofread and edit his manuscript on cultural forces in world politics. And it really absolutely transformed because I had always been interested in religion and politics and culture and politics, but the way in which he looked at the functions of culture really has influenced me tremendously. His name is Professor Ali Mazrui, he's a tremendous giant among African scholars. And in the decades since then, a lot of the things I look at, whether at the United Nations or in academia, or even in fundraising among the various fields I've been in, I've always used that kind of intellectual prism to examine things, and it's just been absolutely remarkable to me. I don't know if that answers.
No. I guess I'm in a somewhat different area, but I think that the most impressive era, let's say, was the time between 1987 or so to 1992 or 3, which witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall and the disintegration, really, of the Soviet Union. And in different technical meetings that occurred during that time, you know, there was a realization at the beginning of that the U.S. and the Soviet Union were adversaries, at least. But as it went along, we stepped back from that confrontation, and it was very interesting to see the former Soviet scientists, for instance, some of whom were in very dire economic straits after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but also the various activities that were undertaken to make sure that they remained in that they didn't go off and become freelance weapons designers. And also the efforts that took place both by the U.S. and the UN and the IAEA to at least control or where the location of high enriched nuclear material was, and to make sure that was guarded at least. And in the case of a lot of the high enriched uranium that was down blended, that is made from high enriched fuel down into reactor grade fuel, and that is a contractual agreement that with the United States came to an end earlier this year, but that resulted in the consumption of like 500 tons of HEU over the course of about 15 years, which several, I think over 10,000 potential warheads that were eliminated. So that is one area in my area that I find a lot of impact, and it was a physicist slash political science professor at MIT that pushed a lot of that through for the megatons to megawatts in that program.
Well, first of all, thank you for quoting me from my bio, Mr. Quinn. I appreciate it. Well, there are a few things that have happened throughout my very short career in terms of the academy, one, and also in terms of being a graduate student for the past decade or so. There are a few things that have happened that really I felt people are now starting to go in the right direction, at least, and I felt people are kind of, at least in my area of Middle East politics, is that people started kind of seeing the bigger picture as opposed to the small micro picture through which they are able to kind of make a much bigger generalization based on something that they see. And you meet one person who is from the Middle East, and you must have met everybody. Then you can potentially understand everyone from the Middle East, of course, right? Of course, that's ridiculous. You've met one woman from the Middle East, and once you've met this woman, you've known every other woman in the Middle East. So, you know, and that's clearly not the case. This has persisted for quite some time, right? And actually, Professor Edward Said, a person who I've worked closely with prior to his passing in 2003, he was one of the pioneers of a concept which we probably all have heard of called Orientalism. And he wrote a book in the late 1970s, 78, 79 called Orientalism, which addresses basically the lens, the distorted lens through which the West has typically, for about a couple of hundred years, looks at the East for colonial purposes, for potential kind of expansion into the Middle East, looks at the Middle East in a way that isn't really true. It's a lens really that is distorted, that is completely different from reality. And you see that every single day in movies, you know, the vilification of Arab men, the kind of victimization of women, and so on. So while some of those things might exist, but this really distorts the real picture. For policy purposes, I felt that around the Gulf War 2003 period, a lot of the discourse around the war was really fueled by a lot of images that were oftentimes untrue and unreal. Okay. And that's really where we have a problem between academics and policymakers, whereby you have academics who know a whole lot of stuff, but then the bridge to policy becomes a little bit difficult. Oftentimes because the policymakers will not want to allow you to come in and talk about what you know very well, okay? Because it might actually fit in you know, it doesn't necessarily fit in the policies that they're advocating. Now, that might happen in some instances, but not necessarily all the time. So I'm not necessarily dissing all people who do policy per se. Okay? Some policymakers are good people, but not all. Okay? And I'm not saying that in kind of like the subjective sense. I'm talking about objectively that they look at the facts and whatnot and evaluate them appropriately. What I'm suggesting here is also how oftentimes picking and choosing of specific academics to fit in within a policy that's already been determined, that is also dangerous. So in the years after the catastrophe of the war of Iraq, okay, the war in Iraq, it's a catastrophe without a doubt, okay? We went in and completely destroyed all the institutions, all the infrastructure of Iraq, and we basically asked our Marines to become policemen, to actually hold traffic. You know, I mean, this is kind of completely ridiculous, right? So it really paralyzed our capabilities in terms of dealing with Iraq. It paralyzed that entire society. It took it back into history, basically, and for all developmental purposes. But the trick that I would suggest here is that after that, a new cadre of academics, young scholars and practitioners and policymakers, they started kind of saying this is really not necessarily the right approach, and we have to kind of address it in a much more appropriate fashion. So I feel that, at least in the policy realm, has transformed over time, that Orientalism is no longer, well, it continues to become significant in terms of policy decisions and so on, but I do not feel that it is as strong as it used to be. Okay, so that's a good win, I think, for now.
I'll be a little more ambiguous. I think I have a specific time that I think is the most exciting time academically and intellectually and just societally, what's going to happen, is in the coming years and in the near future, maybe next month or maybe in 10 years. But the most stimulating experience that I've had intellectually is coming in and engaging your generation. For all the crap that your generation gets in the media, I have never met a group of people that have worked so hard for so little and with such open minds and appreciation. It's really impressive to see students working 2 or 3 jobs and pulling off a full load and having an open mind and engaging the world. And so it's just really exciting to be able to witness this whole generation of students, and this is not just at ISU, this is across the board of my experience at least, of people that are really positioned in a really exciting time and have the resources available to really do some interesting stuff in the world. So it's going to be exciting to watch all of you.
Thank you guys. I really want to thank you for coming and giving us a little more insight. You know, I resumed my academic career 4 years ago, hell-bent on doing DUIs and divorces at the end of it, and I think that you've all given me a lot to think about, and in each one of your fields I can see an area of the law that I'm interested in, that I could be concerned with, and I'd just like to thank all of you for giving me those extra tools.
I actually have a question, if that's okay. Many of us students are about to graduate or soon to graduate, and we're going to run out of scholarships and other things, money, to be able to start traveling abroad and doing things. What advice would you give us on how to begin getting involved internationally, and maybe what opportunities are there?
How I got into it is I was finishing up my master's degree, and it was in American history, which is, I do both American and African history. And I'd been an athlete as an undergraduate, so I'd never been able to go abroad. And I grew up poor, so I wanted to go abroad on someone else's dime. That was really quite important to me. And so I went to my international studies office at UNC Charlotte and found out there are all kinds of potential. The scholarship train isn't yet drained for you. That pool isn't yet drained. And I would go as soon as you've decided what you want to do, or even if you haven't the foggiest idea what you want to do, and find out what resources are out there for various kinds of funding. When you go to graduate school, if you go to graduate school and you want to do international things, make sure that the funding is there for the kind of travel that you need to do the research you want to do. And you know, never turn down a free lunch and never turn down a free trip, and any time you're given the opportunity to travel, take it. Yeah. Figure out how to do it and take it, and obviously, again, if someone else is writing the checks.
One of the things for the UN Alliance of Civilizations was to promote international education, and the international experience is a great way to bridge cultures. Echoing the earlier point that Dr. Katzam made, in fact, I can think of 2 very specific scholarships. There is something called the IBM Watson Scholarship, which is available for people who have graduated from college to then go abroad for, I think, 1 or 2 years. I don't remember the specifics. You can look it up. There's also the Henry Luce has a kind of scholarship specifically to go to Asia for American university students. But I've always thought that, you know, if you're an American, you're very lucky because your native language is English. And one of the things that I have found talking to undergrads is that one of the easiest ways to get abroad, and maybe you do have to pay for your travel, is to just go and teach English. There are places all around the world that are looking for native speakers of English, which they define as being someone who speaks with an American or British accent, not an accent like mine or Dr. Kituku. And you get paid, in some places you get paid very well. But the important thing is that when you teach, and everyone who teaches knows that it really improves your communication skills to be able to teach to people. So that's a very valuable skill in itself. The skill you have as an international experience is valuable too. And let me plug my Twitter account, Friends of the UN, it's Friends UNAOC. I do post opportunities for young people to go for conferences, seminars, workshops, especially those that are somebody else is paying for it.
I think well, graduate school, if you're interested in going to grad school now that you're about to finish, that provides you with sources of income, but also travel opportunities if you're learning a foreign language. And I'm specifically talking about Middle East specific MA programs or PhD programs that would allow you to tap into certain types of resources that are not necessarily available to other people, other areas of interest. So languages that are considered to be critical in a sense, there are multiple types of opportunities for that. One of those resources is something called FLAS, the Foreign Language Area Studies. It even gives money to undergraduate students. It's federally funded resources that would allow a student to study a foreign language. Even, I'm not sure if there is a FLAS program at this institution, but I do know that most major institutions have it. It does exist here, does it not? Okay, anyway. So FLAS is one thing, but there are a whole lot of other opportunities that are available. But you can always drop an email to me, or I'm sure everyone on this panel would be more than happy to say, like, yeah, sure, there's this and there's that.
Oh, just on that particular note, if you're a senior, you might be out of luck. But for those who are juniors and sophomores, there is a program that the State Department has, which during the summer takes students to places outside the United States, so that for 3 months you're immersed in a language learning program in certain critical languages. Languages like Arabic, Hindi, I think Mandarin, etc. So you may not be able to go to Strasbourg or Berlin or places like that, but you could certainly experience a different part of the world and paid for by the U.S. taxpayer, meaning you.
And just one.
Yeah, and I would just like to add too. I mean, going to grad school. One, I would always recommend going to grad school. But the other thing is that it's not. There's a lot of American accredited institutions abroad. American University of Beirut is an outstanding university, and they accept. I mean, a lot of my friends have gotten degrees in Middle Eastern Studies at AUB. And so, don't just limit yourself to thinking, well, I need to, go to an American institution and get my master's or doctorate degree there. There's outstanding universities all around the world, and I would encourage you to explore those.
And just from a professional point of view, not necessarily internationally, but I think we have a problem. We often have a problem thinking that we graduate and then find a job, that the university prepares us for the workforce. And you should get out of that mindset and recognize that while you're in school, while you're in university, you have more resources and time and availability than you'll ever have, and this is the time that you need to be working. So if you're entering into a graduate school, as you enter in, get a plan, and so every semester you're doing something that's leading to a goal. Yep. So ideally, and I tell my grad students this, when you leave my program, I hope you have your own job that you've created, because you shouldn't just count that a job will be given to you. So looking for grant opportunities, travel opportunities, research opportunities, volunteering. And this is, this can help you prepare for in service too, going down to the homeless shelter and volunteering, or getting portfolios of activism started together, and things like that. So when you leave, it's not it's just a movement. It's just a transition compared to a break and a new beginning.
I'd just like to add that one of the things that there are various fellowships, and I think several of us on this panel have had Rotary Foundation fellowships. I was in Switzerland for a year. I'm not sure how the structure of that particular fellowship has changed over the something like 40 years since I had that fellowship, but it does emphasize you're going to a place where English is not the first language, is not the predominant language. And it was mentioned earlier, your ability to go overseas and to teach English as a foreign language. But a great, I think, sensitizer there is to go overseas and speak a different language and find out what other people are going through.
It's the last day, I guess I'm just going to appeal for your help, okay? A number of you up there. Basically, I'm involved in a long-time project here over 30 years, dealing with genocide, dealing with redacted information materials, dealing with a weapons corporation, which goes by the name of FMC. It's part of the largest weapons corporation in the world. They are no longer here, but yes, they are, and they own $1 billion mountain of uranium materials outside of Pocatello. I have to commend the INL for work with their oversight studies and their issues through the years, because I dealt with them many years ago under the name of the Toxic Avenger. They got it there in their records on me and then. But basically, they've come a long way, but they're not part of our situation in Pocatello area. We've tried to get the oversight study groups here going. We've testified in terms of genocidal acts against the communities here, the people here, intentional. I've collected extensive data in the past in terms of what's been redacted, what's been diluted, what's been misinformed, and it continues to this day, even though there was some successes in the past. So basically, it's an issue that a lot of people don't know about in the world. We try to explain it. The nuclear industry doesn't want to be tarnished, so they kind of cover it up. Monsanto does great things for its community, but it's a lot of Superfund sites there. We have the most highly density of Superfund sites in the country. It's here. So there are efforts, or people trying to do efforts for saving lives. We have laws that we passed, like the Radiation Compensation Act, 1991. I worked with the downwinders on that. It's applicable here, but they don't even want to tell anybody. They don't want to give people the ability to get compensation. EPA's got cases against them that we have. Not sharing information, not informing, not dealing with their situation, covering up, hiding materials, not delivering material through Freedom of Information Act. So it's a difficult thing. So we try to get the best we can for the world to know what's been going on in this region, and especially in this town, because they put it in the town, in the schools, and in our homes, in our alleyways, and things like that. And then just did for even back when I was the last wind situation, making it illegal and not to be used, but it was supposed to be cleaned up, just a process of cover-up. Now, INL, Department of Energy, has a device called the Whole Body Count Cave. They got a new one. They utilized, of course, when they had a little accident up there to help, save lives. And we just had trying to do a simple request of, say, if they take the old one and donate it to this university. It'd be the first university in the country with such a device. And it'd be very useful, and of course help our area, but also look at the whole issue of cleanup in our community here, and in southeastern Idaho to some extent, because it just, once they start trying to argue that this is, it's okay, or this or that, but they never really told anybody in the beginning, because FMC is a weapons corporation. They made hundreds of billions of dollars in our community, and again, they're still here. So it's something for you to learn about. Something for you to helpful. Talk to Linda Hotzenbuehler, things like that. See if we can actually get that.
You're talking
donated.
specifically about the phosphate slag.
Well, it's uranium ore. I studied it.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
Yeah, we use the word slag, but that's also what we call a promiscuous woman.
Okay.
And so, yeah, this is propaganda. But it even says in there, about the airborne capacity and contamination issues. And I don't know if you ever read our document on meteorological fallout, type 3, that's picked up by wind, dusted on our community or nearby. Yeah, we forget about little things like that. In the West, we have wind.
Totally.
And it does it. A little dust devil comes and sucks it up, boom, dumps it right next door.
Yeah.
Some serious issues in the area, and maybe we can get to
I've heard.
move in some of these directions. But get your balance on it.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for,
Well, just a general comment, more or less to do with Pocatello, but democratic theory perhaps, is that there's this term of parrhesia, the ability to speak frankly, to tell truth, that's tied to the democratic process, and it comes from ancient Greece. And the notion is that we all in an ideal democracy have the equal ability to speak, right? That for us to all be functioning together, we are all the same in one way or another. But whenever we try to speak truth, be parrhesiatic in our discourse, what happens is we have to take a risk because we are no longer the same as everybody else. We step out of that safety. We step out of the herd or the flock. And when we do that, it's risky because we risk not being heard. We take that chance. And once that chance occurs, people might listen, they might hear truth, and they also might lose the ability to hear that person. And so its ability, perhaps it's not as much about getting environmental action occurred, but building back that public space in which people can be heard and trusted. And so that's just, perhaps it's more of a commentary on social discourse and the social fabric than it is with any weapons material or anything like that. It's just the ability to understand where we're all coming from and why.
Yes, please.
Something that kind of struck me while being at college is originally I came here as an engineering student. Now I'm a history student with a minor in political science. So I think it might be useful if if you could give us like maybe some recommendations on different classes that we can take outside of our major that will help broaden our perspective, and maybe we're the people that have to deal with issues that come up in the future, whether we're a specialist in science or not, which I will not be, or something else. What are some interesting classes that you have seen or things that students can get involved of that maybe are a little outside of their focus but can help them in the future, whether they're a specialist in certain things?
You know, I'm going to take this if possible. So I think, you know, I work at the University of Washington, Bothell, and it's not the large, big research institution, but in terms of our faculty, we do research and teach as well. So we spend actually quite a bit of time with our students one-on-one. So I know every student's name, right? And I tend to teach a little bit higher than a typical big research one institution, right? The good thing about my institution is that we actually do not like one focus. We are a school of interdisciplinary arts and sciences. So you could in fact pursue art if that informs your knowledge about science. Sure, go right ahead, okay? So you find a lot of interesting things, but oftentimes things that are not fully developed in a sense. There is plenty of opportunities, not only at my institution, but other institutions around the world, and around the United States in particular, that would do that. So I would actually kind of advise against fitting in one box. If my job is to actually teach a student of mine something, it would be to actually think outside the box, because that's what creativity is all about, one. Two, for the longest time, even when I started graduate school, right, and people who were being hired as academics, they didn't do a whole lot of stuff, right? In terms of skills, they had to have limited amounts of skills. Today's world, however, requires that you have to be a scientist, a physicist, a biologist, you have to know multiple things in order for you to actually be able to do the interesting stuff you really want to do. So multidisciplinary education and learning is something very significant. So every time you look at a syllabus, okay, of a professor here at your institution, here, Idaho State University, if that person is utilizing more than one type of literature, I mean, and by literature I mean scholarly literature, not necessarily literary one, if they're using multiple, if it's a political science class, but there is also a novel, okay, novel actually enriches your ability to engage with the text and actually be able to understand certain things that a political science book does not necessarily provide you, okay? I had the privilege once of teaching actually at an art school. Yes, art school. I taught Middle East politics at an art school, and I taught general Middle East class. It's at Cornish College of the Arts. It's one of the top schools on the West Coast for art, and it is based in Seattle, where I live. So the interesting thing about that is that I had to myself think outside the box in order for me to meet the demands and desires of my students. A lot of them were actually painters. A lot of them were composers, music composers. So the final project, instead of a regular paper that all of us hate as academics, we hate grading, regardless of how much we actually tell you we like it, we actually don't.
Fact.
Yeah. So we just, that's probably the worst part of our job. It's like, okay, procrastinating the grading process. For the final project, instead of a paper, was actually a painting in some instances. I even had a student who actually composed a song because they were inspired by what they learned. And they actually, not necessarily that they're like just, come up with something. I would actually get experts who actually know composition, and they would hear a story. The student would actually tell a story and then relate it to this. So again, what I'm suggesting is think outside the box. Okay, that will definitely help you. Okay, it can only help you.
Can I just quickly jump in? The best thing I've heard all week, and I've heard a bunch of good week, is the conversion of a potential engineering student into a history major. I
don't know what happened, but that's great.
Welcome to the light.
I'm just going to be very practical. There are two classes that I think you may already be taking, but I think it would be very important. And one is foreign language, of course, but I would also make a plug for learning about world religions, because that's going to be increasingly important in international affairs, and it's always been important, but people haven't recognized it. 3 things to do outside the class. One, you're already doing this in some senses, is leadership of student organizations. That's an invaluable opportunity to make connections with people whom you'll probably be connected with all your life. Number 2, fundraising. This is a very important skill to have in any field that you go into, whether you become a professor or an international affairs professional. Maybe not so much if you go into government, but perhaps even in government there might be a need to do grant writing, proposal writing, that kind of stuff. And the third one is, take opportunities to learn how to create media on the web and edit media on the web. So if you have the skills, particularly to do videos and things like that, that's also going to be important in pretty much any field you are in. So even if you're a professor and you can come up with snappy videos about your areas, that can make you very popular as a star.
So take my classes. Is basically, if you believe this. So my urban theory class semester started out with Main Street by Sinclair Lewis, and looking at the small town attitude and moving, and we're using Pinterest and videos and all those types of things. So there are lots of professors on this campus that are doing tons of things like that, which are really fun. And it's a lot easier to grade tweets than it is an essay. It makes it really fast. But another little plug. Because of these concerns, we're adjusting the political science program a little bit to create a minor in public, not create a minor, but change some of our public administration classes. Because what we teach is organizational theory, budgeting, how to do all these applied things of policy making, and tons of things like that, and that are really valuable for anybody. A historian does fundraising and deals with public policy and zoning. Environmental, you deal with urban stuff all the time. And in nuclear science, you do policy, non-proliferation, you're very specifically tied to the policy. And social work programs are the same way. That you learn all of these tangible, good, hard skills that enhance any program, any degree. And just looking at complementing those things together. And they're really fun, enjoyable programs too. They're enjoyable programs. And so social work, Boise, public administration, grad school, sign up.
I'd like to add something from, let's say, the engineering end of the table here, and that is that
Sorry, we stole one from you.
Yeah, okay. But no, to really agree with what Derek was saying there, that is it, and I think that engineers, to a lesser extent scientists, but engineers in particular, get so involved in their individual studies that sometimes they don't know enough history. They don't know enough about how political science works, how a lot of these different processes work. And you become, when you then graduate and go out to do something, you get involved in EIS hearings, and you get involved with a lot of public speaking encounters where you have to appreciate the culture of the people that you're talking to, but also you have to be able to explain what you do in 30 seconds that they could appreciate that. And so that's not something that necessarily has to come as part of the curriculum, but I think that there's a real need to know a wide range of things at sort of the Scientific American or Wikipedia level. It's not that you have to be an expert. It's not that you need to know how to do Bessel functions in order to talk about electrical engineering, but you have to have a general idea of what's going on in some of these, in your BlackBerry, for instance, and what some of the issues about spectrum allocation and that sort of thing are. Not necessarily to be an expert in that field, but to be able to understand what the concerns are.
Yeah, and increasingly, Arizona State, where I received my PhD from, they've put an enormous amount of effort into receiving National Science Foundation grants to study nanotechnology and emerging technologies, biotech, all that stuff, where they're placing social scientists and philosophers in the lab. And so you have the opportunity to be in a nuclear lab and working with nuclear scientists, but be an international studies graduate. We're recognizing the complexity of our problems has rapidly increased beyond our comprehension, and also the social risk has also gone up. And so previously we had high degrees of certainty and low degrees of risk in theory when we came to policy matters, but now we recognize complete opposite. So there's some really exciting opportunities for social scientists, people in the humanities, the arts, to engage science in really fun terms for us because we don't have to learn the functions.
You know, I'm very excited. You know, there's been a huge push, not only in the National Science Foundation, but the National Institutes of Health, and translational science is what it's called, you know, basically taking sort of basic science and making it applicable as quickly as possible. My last grant I just submitted to the NIH a couple weeks ago included an applied linguist, a nurse, 2 social workers, you know, and it was very, you know, a very broad, you know, interdisciplinary effort, you know, we think is going to make it more competitive because, you know, why do I have an applied linguist? And what we're doing is we're studying resettlement of refugees in Boise and following them and seeing what's predictive of healthy resettlement for these children. You know, I don't know anything about swabbing people's cheeks and checking cortisol levels, but apparently that's in my grant, right? And apparently it matters with regards to studying anxiety. I know how to study anxiety by having people fill out forms. This nurse happens to know how to do it by swabbing people's cheeks and going into a lab and testing these levels and saying yes. And then, you know, in this applied linguist, well, I'm talking to refugees who, you know, have, you know, we're talking 15 languages in Boise. So it'd be pretty helpful to have an applied linguist because we're asking them very complicated questions about their lives. We gotta have buy-in by the subjects in terms of like, hey, I want to stick something in your kid's mouth. Are you okay with that? So doing all that, I mean, really requires an interdisciplinary effort, and I'm very excited that, you know, I get to work across with my colleagues from various disciplines, including bringing in the humanities, which oftentimes I think has been pushed aside by the hard sciences, and I kind of sit in the middle somewhere. I don't know where social work really relies, but, you know, I think that's where I think, you know, where we're talking about, you know, trying to get those multiple sort of experiences, especially when you're in school, when you have that opportunity, because, you know, like Steve was saying, you can stovepipe really easily and just really focus on that one thing you're really good at, and the next thing you know, you're kind of blindsided by the fact that the way you're communicating your knowledge or your efforts is being misinterpreted because you don't understand the process outside of your own discipline.
Yeah, I'm going to give completely different advice. You know what you should take? You should take what you want to take. That's what you should take. You know, you need to learn this, you need to learn it. You need to take what engages your passions. You need to take what engages your interests. You need to take the kinds of things that are going to make you want to go to class and want to do the reading and want to read more. That's the only should. You're an undergraduate, and if I could do it all over again, I'd only take the stuff I wanted to take. Forget all the other stuff. Take what you want to take.
I mean, I agree with you. But you can also take what you like, but in a multidisciplinary fashion.
Yeah. Look across the curriculum.
And get some skills, too.
Yeah. But no, I agree. I mean, you really have to have a passion for what you do. You really have to like what you want to do. Both in terms, not only professionally speaking, but also in terms of your academic preparation. I've met a lot of miserable people in grad school. Grad school is not for everyone, especially the PhD. The MA is easy. You can do it fine. It's over. A year and a half, 2 years, you can be done very quickly and get a job. A PhD takes 7 years out of your life, and once you're almost done, you'll have, you know, very, very limited types of opportunities in terms of academic jobs, the traditional academic jobs.
So it takes a lot of your time. So if you want to pursue a PhD, follow something you love very much. I completely concur in that sense. One. But try to take things in kind of, again, outside the box realm in terms of not necessarily fitting one box. Think. I mean, I want to say globally, but think multiple through multiple lenses as opposed to one. I want to go back to Ben's question, if I may. Ben is your name, right? Yes. Which was, what sort of recommendations? And I want to add one thing. In Palestine, after Israel was created in 1948, there were villages that were actually under a lot of stress that are inside Israel that had just been created. So they were not allowed to go. Movement was very, very severely restricted, which kind of created a lot of problems for these people in those small towns from actually interacting with other towns. So they were really isolated. So kind of the apocalyptic type of situation where you are kind of disconnected from the entire world happened for about 20 years. Once that was over, those people in those little towns were unable to really communicate in the kind of in an old way, because they kind of developed their own ways of, they evolved on their own in some ways as opposed to other little villages, Palestinian villages. But they also missed a whole lot of knowledge about the outside world, okay? Which I think is really an interesting thing that they ended up doing, which is to get a lot of money, well, not a lot, like a little pocket of money that they put together. And they would pick 1 or 2 young people who would go to a place, to a foreign country, learn something and come back, okay, for about like 2 or 3 weeks, and come back and tell them what they learned. The entire village would actually meet in the square, in the town square, and they would talk about what they've learned, what's interesting and what's not, and so that they would actually update their knowledge, given the fact that literacy rates were still relatively low, but they were increasing. They're better than earlier in the century. But that was an interesting model that they operated, and it ended up creating some very fantastic people. Azmi Bishara, for example, is one of those people. Okay, who was a very interesting former politician who's a very important intellectual in the Middle East. That's one. Now, interestingly enough, when I moved to Washington State, there was a town in Washington that still does this, that they would actually, they put money together, and again, without necessarily talking to the people in Palestine. This happened in 1967, right? But they are doing the same thing, that they actually get a few young people, men and women, young women together, young men together, who want to go to New York, and they don't have the financial ability to do it. So the people will actually put in that town, they have a little fund, and they would select a few people every 3 months. 3 people would go to New York, and it costs relatively cheap because they actually share a room together at a hotel, cheap airline tickets, you can, all that sort of stuff. And they would come, but on the promise that they will give something to their community. So they would actually present what they, their experiences and so on. So I think this would do well in relatively smaller cities, okay? A place like Pocatello, for example. Maybe you should start doing that. Maybe you should seek the funds to do it. But that's a way to think about thinking outside the box in terms of what you could potentially do, in a sense, for your own community if you care about this community, and I'm sure you do. But also to consider, how you could actually get to the next level, in a sense, right?
No, don't apologize.
I'm sorry that I kind of took the conversation in a different direction.
And I'm going to take it back.
Okay.
I'm going to disagree and say, just don't take what you want, for a reason.
I think I'm doing okay, and I took what I wanted.
I took what I wanted.
But you loved what you wanted.
I took what I wanted as an undergraduate, philosophy and religious studies at Montana State. Got a job immediately after college, because when you graduate as a senior, the job opportunities exist when you're a senior and you're moving into the market. 2 years later, the company that I was working for had a massive layoff, and I was laid off, and so I was a stay-at-home dad for 5 years. Going back into the job market was impossible. I had to go back to graduate school because there was not any opportunities, because I stepped out of the workforce. And this is a very common thing that many women feel that men don't notice, is that people pursue what they want, and they step out and they have a family, and guess what happens? Is when they go back into the workforce, they have to explain a 5-year gap in their employment history, and they have an undergraduate degree in something that they really like to study instead of something very applied. Now, this isn't gendered as much as it used to be. It happened to me, it happens to other friends that I have. But the generation that's older than me, it's a very common thing, I see people nodding their head. That, and it's something that we need to be aware of, that there is this built-in, if everything goes smoothly, it's an awesome plan. But having some backup that if something hits the fan and you don't know what to do, what are you going to do? Because grad school turns out to be really expensive if you can't fund it. And a lot of times stepping out of that for 4 or 5 years in small areas like this, there isn't a lot of lines to fund graduate students. So then you having to pay it out of pocket, and then you create the student loan debt. So just be conscious of that. Do what you want, but also somehow have a backup that's a hard skill or something. Or a sugar mama or a sugar daddy or a rich uncle or
I think
just be born affluent.
I think
born white is great.
I think what all of us are saying is whether for fun or for pleasure, just do multiple things, because the fact is that, you know, for your parents' generation, they may have changed careers maybe once or twice. Maybe they were lucky enough to be in a job until they retired. But what we're going to see in the future is people not just switching jobs, but switching entire career fields. Probably, I've seen predictions of at least 10 times in your life. That's why Kurt Vonnegut made a famous commencement speech in which he said, you know, you grow old when you know what you want to, when you know what you're going to be doing. So, you know, never grow old. Always saying, maybe I'll do this next, you know, for the next couple of years. And you should have the skills to be able to do that.
I've already switched careers like 5 times, I think.
Yeah, and I was a journalist. I've been a researcher, academic type. I've been at the United Nations. I've been back in academia. I've also been in development, fundraising, university administration. So 5, so 1 for each decade.
Multiple skills. Yeah.
All right. So, okay.
I just have a comment. I'm a neighbor, and excuse me, and I am amazed by the quality of this symposium that has been on. I've been here every day, and it has been outstanding. And so I applaud what the students have done to pull this together. It is just so good. It's a breath of fresh air for our city.
Thanks to the students. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Okay, before I turn the podium over to our able President Kim to do the closing remarks, let me summarize this way. We have heard all kinds of perspectives. So it's either you pursue what you want to study, or you take a broader liberal arts education. Morgan, you are not the only one who was supposed to be an engineer who turned away. I was supposed to be an engineer also. Somebody adopted me to do history, and out of curiosity, I started doing political science as well. So you are not the only one. But I've been to 26 countries. I've studied in Africa. I've studied in Europe. I've studied in Canada before coming to the US. I've kind of seen it all. I have a PhD in political science. I have a PhD in history. I've taken students to study abroad in different countries. So the dialogue is like the 11 blind men that we are about to describe how an elephant looks like. So what the blind men we are doing was just to touch different parts of the elephant. Some people will say, oh, the elephant is like a wall because they touch the body of the elephant. Some of them will say, oh, it's like an umbrella because they touch the ears. But what I want to say is this. Do what you want to do, but at the same time also get broader education. But travel abroad. No matter how brilliant you are, no matter how imaginative you are, you cannot understand the foreign society you are imagining about unless you are there on the ground. Dance with the people, eat with the people, appreciate their problems, invent something. You must be creative. I'll give you 2 examples. In 2007, a colleague took British students to Kenya, and they were participating in this STEM program. So this young man was an engineering student, but while he was in Kenya, he was very creative. He was watching the people. He realized that their cars were breaking down every time or often, and he said, probably this is not the kind of car they should be using here. So to summarize that story, he founded his own car company in Kenya, and he is doing very well. He came back to UK, and so many banks were ready to sponsor the car company. That's the kind of creativity I'm talking about. Now, the final example I want to give is this. You remember when somebody founded the Viagra, and everybody was like, yeah. You remember Viagra? And everybody was like, yeah. But none of you, probably you don't know the story behind the Viagra, which is now a multi-billion-dollar drug. Is that not true? Students like you went to Nigeria, in the northern part of Nigeria, and discovered a stem of tree. The local people eat the stem, and they have been drinking it they can also turn into liquid and drink it for thousands of years. And he said, there must be something inside there that get the people high when they drink it. He brought some of them home, put them in the laboratory, and they analyzed it and found some of the stuff they used to make Viagra. That's the kind of creativity I want you to engage in. So there are thousands of opportunities out there. But what I have found is this. Some students go on a study abroad and just play, take pictures, run around, go to nightclubs, and then spend their money and then come back. That's not study abroad. When you are studying abroad, open your eyes, be creative, and think ahead of the program you went there to study. Please, thank you very much for your wonderful ideas. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, can we get another round for our delegates? They've been super wonderful this year. I really enjoyed every aspect of the symposium this year, especially the opportunity to interact with each of the delegates and learn more about what they do at their universities. Pocatello is such a small town, and it is such a great opportunity to be able to have these delegates come and open the window into the outside world. Unfortunately, some of our delegates had to leave early, but I kind of want to turn back and ask each of them for a moment about what was their favorite part of their time here.
I have to say the favorite part of my time here was meeting and talking with each of you. I'm just so damn impressed with all of you. You guys are amazing. You make me hopeful about the future of the international relations of this country.
I would definitely echo that. Yeah. I mean, I hardly ever come to Idaho, but I live in Washington, so I have been to Idaho before. It's relatively close, but I must say I have been absolutely impressed by the quality of undergraduate students here. I wish you all the best, and please do let me know when you want to go to graduate school, if you do want to go to graduate school, because I can help you, and I will help you because I know what sort of caliber you are, because you're really good. Okay, so thank you, one. Two, anytime I can help in terms of, feel free if you do not want to go to grad school to also communicate with me. That's the second. So, but one thing that I enjoyed in terms of my time is interacting with the students, of course, and having those types of conversations, not only about their academic situation, but also I've learned so much about Pocatello. Okay, I've learned so much about this local community. I've learned so much about this part of Idaho that oftentimes is completely forgotten and no one talks about. Okay. I'm sorry to say, but I get invited to give a talk at Harvard. I give a talk at UCLA. I give a talk at Brown, and very few times that I get a call from a place like this. And coming here to me is probably one of the most rewarding experiences, I must say. Okay, so I'm very thankful for the opportunity. But yeah, I wish you the best. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the same. The people, the students, and also the colleagues. Like usually at a situation like this, you have nice conversations about your work, and you go off and do your thing in the evening, and then you come back the next day and you have nice conversations about your work, and by the third day you're ready to go home. And I'm a cynic most of it, but I actually like some of you guys, which is nice. And it's been remarkable. Thanks. And on the I want to put it out for public record so that it puts pressure on the organizers for next year. But when one of the questions was, would you return? My answer was, please, please, please. And so I want to come back. And so it was fantastic. And everybody in the not just the students. I think we've appropriately calibrated how much we recognize how great they are. But everybody, the people from the community also showing. I know that when we do these kinds of things at my institution, it's the community engagement that can be the toughest to get, and it's been very impressive to see not only some of the same faces every single day, but also new faces each day adding to it, and it's just been a lot of fun. I think I'm the only one staying till like tomorrow afternoon. So if there are any social options for this evening, us too. I'm in room 118 with the Red Lion Inn.
Yeah, I would say that the students were definitely the best part about it. I was talking to Derek yesterday about, I wouldn't be surprised in 10 years to read about somebody in the New York Times that was one of the organizers here in a good way. There's clear leadership here from Kim on down. Been extraordinarily well organized, very bright, very engaged, which I wish I could say for all of my students back at Boise State, which they're good students, of course. But this is the first time I think in a little while where I've really felt that every student I've encountered in the last 3 days has been focused and engaged and intellectually curious. And I think I can speak for other professors when you say, having that 100% is a rare opportunity, and so. That's been really exciting for me. And the other thing is that, my colleagues here, meeting them and talking with them about their work and such. Like Derek was saying, oftentimes you go to these conferences, you give your presentation, some platitudes, go out, have a few drinks, and then, go skiing the next day because there's nothing else you want to see in the conference or whatever. This is one where I've looking forward every morning to coming here and listening to the talks and everything, and like I say, that's for me anyway. That's pretty rare. I'm not, I'll leave it at that.
I'd like to add the interacting with the students yesterday and today has been a real high point for me in this. Also, I'd like to say that. This is an academic discipline that I don't generally have much interaction with, and I found it very, very interesting, and it brought out a lot of aspects that I just don't generally think about in terms of the recognition of other cultures and other countries and how this works both on the international and the domestic level. And so that sort of interaction, particularly the calls that we had before in organizing this, that really made me think about what are the implications of a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about, that I did talk about earlier.
We have some great students and grad students who need some interns.
Yes.
I just want to thank, it's been a great experience being an alternate and stepping in at the last minute to get to know all of you and hear all of your work. And as someone that grew up in the West and growing up in Bozeman, it's like Pocatello is when I was a kid. It seems exactly the same. Deja vu sometimes, it's spooky. But like the airport, right? And the empty downtown and stuff like that. So I didn't have the opportunity to travel and to hear of the international emphasis, and I'm planning already how we can do this. But the second part that's really exciting is just to be able to show off our institution to you. Because all of you are really too hard on yourself often. Because we're forgotten. Pocatello sometimes, oh, shoot. But we have an incredible institution here with incredible students, and to be able to show off what you do to some great scholars, it means a lot. So thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us. Thank you for having us.
Okay, I want to extend my appreciation for each one of you for being part of a symposium this year. Without you, the symposium would not be possible. From the first panel to the last, we heard incredible stories of adventure, research, and genuine interest for recognizing the value of every human. The symposium is important for everyone involved, including the students, the faculty and staff at Idaho State University, and the community members. We couldn't have done it without you guys. So it provides valuable experience and insight into the world outside of Pocatello. And this year has provided a window into the world of human rights violations and what the past, present, and future will look like for many people across the world. As we look forward to next year's symposium, we invite you to provide input so we can improve our symposium. And you can fill out a survey in the back of the room, and you can leave it here, or you can also mail it to the International Studies Office, or email us at iac@isu.edu. Thank you again to everyone who's able to attend, and especially to those who have faithfully attended the symposium each year. So you can plan ahead for next year. The tentative dates for next year's symposium are February 25th, 26th, and 27th, and we greatly appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you again next year. Thank you. I'd also like to announce that next week we have the 10th Annual Gender and Sexuality in Everyday Life Conference. It is March 3rd and March 4th. It's from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. on the 3rd, and then 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. on the 4th, and it's going to be in the Salmon River Suites in this building, in the ISU Student Union building. Thank you.
Let me give you my card.
I don't have my cards on.
Okay, so email me.
Will do.
Yeah, I'd love to, yeah, it's just a,
Thank
118,
you.
yeah? I love that. It's hilarious.
Yeah, my presupposition for a student like that is they want to run business, which I'm a farm advocate of. I'm not thinking a kid like that's going to just take, 16 extra hours of history. Yeah, 16 extra hours, yes.
Right,
So
yeah.
under a presupposition that he's not an idiot, and if he's an idiot, then they should just take what he needs to take.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the most refreshing thing here. I wasn't going to say it, but because I like some of my students, but it's really nice to be surrounded by 20-year-olds who are bumbling idiots.
Isn't it?
I mean,
For students?
What's the situation? Brian, now.
I'm interested. Students here are really, I mean, maybe we only have like crème de la crème, but
I'm sure we do. I mean, I'm sure this is
yeah,
not a
but
representative.
but even with that, even like crème de la crème at other places, some.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're in it for the.
But these people are meticulous. These people are absolutely meticulous. We were never late. Never. Not even like for 5 minutes. They were always, and then not gonna. Yeah, but then also there were some adjustments when we felt. Remember, like the first day we were tired, and they said, "Come." In third, we were like, "You know what? Can we skip dinner?" And they were like, "No, no."
Well, they came in
Then they changed the entire. There was a second day actually.
Yeah, the second they moved it back.
Then they moved it back, and they were like, "Oh, we'll do dinner then," and done. They are able to adjust under circumstances. So can you imagine like having one of those as a PhD student? As your
I was going to
fully funded.
I was going to
self-advertise,
but I haven't gotten this, but I'm this close to getting a chair. Oh, nice. Give me a grad student. And the problem is, other people who have had the chairs at the university haven't done the job of recruiting, so sometimes I only just have to come in. And it's because we can't recruit our own student body particularly well, because we don't have enough who are good enough, and those that are there other, like this will kind of be our fourth funded student we get to. There's another down chair in oil and gas, and then there will be lots of recruitment. It's going to be from this kind of institution. It's going to be from a state institution that's not a research one. No one's going to come from the University of Washington, Seattle to get a master's at and they're not going to come
unless they have to go there for family reasons, and they go like they want to apply.
oil and gas,
But you cannot recruit them. This is your place.
Right.
The public administration classes. Yep. The MPA. Yeah.
Here, they tried to play
Oh wow. You should.
I found it very, very cheaply, and I just might do it.
No, love it. For seniors,
Yeah, that's what it is here.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Spouses,
More from
married spouses.
looking
Marriage,
at
and I know it's $5 too.
That's pretty good.
Sure.
Yeah, we're gonna have lunch and then we're probably
We're
out.
at 5 at the room.
Okay.
All the young faculty.
Yeah, I'll be gone.
I'll be here. Yeah, I'll watch the way to get down there.
That's really close.
Nice.
Not the best beer, but it's
Yeah, it's fine.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, the students. It's interesting because they are. So I have kind of like a whole bunch of. We're doing the gender and sexuality conference next week at Gender Center, and LGBTQ queer kids. So
Yeah, that's your contact list.
yeah, like growing up gay in Idaho, growing up gay in Mormon.
These are the type of students who are like.
So we're looking
They come here and they are open, and they are reading doctoral stuff that was above my level. As seniors, they're coming in, they're like, well, I just read, so I did Deleuze for my PhD, and they're coming in and they're telling me more about Deleuze than I spent 2 years reading about. Like,
I know where they're at.
Can I get the
Basically,
for the
UEID?
Sure.
Oh, good.
Okay.
The director.
Because, not that I'm gonna get shitty, but I don't want to have any drinks in a foreign town with a rental car. That's me as a recipe for. Oh, yeah, because you get lost.
Everything with me has to go through the director.
So, yeah, would you mind? Like 4:45?
that's fine. Yep.
Cool,
Just
thank you.
I'll pull up in front of the lobby.
They're still present. The plants are get rid of it so it doesn't go.
Oh, yeah.
Argue about it. 14 minutes.
I even skipped out on one yesterday when one of the students gave me a tour of campus. Yeah, I got a personalized tour from so it's really nice.
But then all that information.
And all I know is just from what I can see from the interstate. Have they put any cover or anything over it?
It's part of the whole, rather than 10 feet, which is supposed to cover any kind of material. No, we're going to sell it. They own it. I had to bring that all out. Who owns it?
Do we sell the land or sell the
tile? I don't think it's a good spot. For the spring. And they sell spring. I always say, Monsanto made the one mistake. They allowed them to build the town. We'll need more houses. Okay, I guess it'd be okay.
Next year I'm going to one, and then I'm going to come the year after. Then I check those boxes.
Monsanto's involved in things here, but every time we come back and outdoors, how many times have we had this done here? Because we already know she's
I know there was one case sometime in the 80s where there was a truckload of that slag that was sold to the side.
Well, elephants are more than Indian, but also
I think at the when they finally detected, they actually had to put it in directly in the radioactive waste area.
Kind of situation here. There was a issue building in the background. Chuck was already doing Costello. And then later when it got brought up, and then they started trying to justify it, and not really want us to talk about what it was. Pretty much redacted a long time ago. Government
Is that used much for railroad
It's not allowed to be used anymore. That's what was a success when it was before. The railroad wasn't. So they had this, in fact, it was new ballast. It looks like it to cover it up. I think it was Arizona or something that used it that far. Because it wasn't really
well, yeah.
Then you're not supposed to be hanging out in the railroad tracks. But the ballast people, Siskin, EPA, she's retired. She comes up to me I really feel bad about ballast workers. Exactly. It's never had a mask on. Engineers that I know here who put our mask on.
Yeah. And of course, in cases like that, the real mobile is the 3-day xenon radon.
Radon, break it down.
And then you get the radon daughters, which have a tendency to stick on synthetic clothing.
Oh yeah, I brought that up in here. We're testing if you got polyester clothing. It attracts the uranium, decay chain particles. No, we've done all this. I know all that.
you know, still, you know, it's an equilibrium, you know, and the whole chain's there. Airborne issues in the pathway. And this has been an area of unusual well, we're talking about a random source of destruction of cells.
You'll excuse me, I don't mean